morning, everyone, and welcome to our latest Indica Books Writers Open House with Otis. And you know the drill, we invite people to send in their writing pieces about approximately 800 words in size. And on Sundays, Otis goes over the piece. Before that, you should, however, make sure that you send in that piece by Friday, end of days, your time, so that he has time to go over the piece and send feedback. And then when we meet on Sundays, he goes over the piece, and anyone else can also go ahead and ask questions. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to you, Otis. One last thing, we do also have a WhatsApp group for any discussions that you want to continue. So I'm going to share that link in just a little bit. The WhatsApp group is strictly optional, so no obligation for anyone to join or not join. And really over to you, Otis, now.
Okay, great. Welcome everybody. Okay, we have 5 pieces, so I think maybe we just jump right in and try and establish a little bit of a routine. So when we do your piece, I'll ask you to read a little bit about it and talk to us a little bit about what you were trying to accomplish, and then I'll give you a few notes, and then we'll do the next piece, and then from hopefully we'll have time. There's some comments about story construction that I'll try and make at the end that I think will apply to all of these pieces, and basically all of our pieces, no matter what we're writing, whenever, and all my pieces too. So let's start. I think we have Sri Charan, and maybe you could read a little bit of this piece and talk to us about it.
Hey, hi Otis.
Maybe just, hey, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good.
Maybe just let's just we'll do something maybe a little bit more usual to kind of time saving. We'll just have you read the first page and then talk to us about it.
Okay, sure. The snoring of the sea was sweet in Sri's ears, towering over the snores of his companions. They were a part of 5, sharing a room in a beach resort, although they were only two beds for them. To keep the cost down, they had grouped as 2 twos and a 1. Sri had been that unlucky one to sleep on a heavy mattress laid below the beds on the floor. He did not mind. The others were couples, and he was the only bachelor in their party. None of the others seemed as excited to watch the sunrise from the sea. When he woke up, as the alarm rang 6, the sea was still sleeping, huddled in the black cloak around, raising white puffs and sucking them again. He took a little while to make out the hand of the sea, with its 1,000 milky fingers brushing on the sand in the dark. He wanted to climb the wall with the iron grating, to touch the hand of the sea, and give himself to its care. Yet, it felt odd at the moment to remind himself of the frightening stature of the sea. A mother's caring hands can also strike the child hard. The sea is no different. He thought the sunrise would be hard at 6, but the sun was taking his own sweet time. The wooden gate in the middle of the iron grating was barred still, with the watchman taking his own sweet time. He was at the gate throughout the night awake, keeping an eye on those 2 daring to venture near the sleeping rascals. With nothing to do, he walked on the grass yard behind the wall, almost a tiny marsh with coconut trees looming above it. A coconut bunch hung away from a canopy, waiting to fall on someone unlucky below at a wrong time. He kept his distance well from the particular tree.
Okay, thank you. Actually, wanna just mark that, with this story, as you're reading it, it reminds me how much I like this story, because it's dealing with a protagonist who I feel is just very real and is in a very real place in a lot of ways, except for his depiction of that place can seem somewhat, exaggerated and romanticized. But
Yeah,
I
it's
really
me.
like that. I like this.
Yeah, it's me. I mean, I am the protagonist in that story. It's my
I,
experience of air travel or like.
I thought maybe that was the case. Okay, so tell us what you're after in this piece.
Yeah, okay. This is one of my experiences while I'm traveling to Pondicherry, while I am staying in Mahabalipuram in Chennai. It's a place. So what happened at the time was there is a funny incident where I rose early to click some pictures of the sun rising above the ocean, and then I took many pictures actually, struggling to go above the hill and all that. But when I came down, suddenly an ocean hit me and the phone fell into the sea. When I picked it up, it was not working. So all the pictures I took were gone.
Okay. Well, great. I I enjoyed this piece. Um, I as I mentioned, this character's interaction with the ocean seems romanticized, which I basically do agree with. Like I certainly romanticize the ocean, and I love being at the ocean. Um, but I think the probably the main thing for me here in this piece, and I think something that just needs to be taken out of it, and we'll talk more about this with my notes later on, is that this seems to be more of an encounter than, in a sense, a story. So th- this is we're definitely going to talk about this in relationship to all the pieces, but it seems to me that a story is about a struggle, right? And it's a struggle between a protagonist force and an antagonist force. And it isn't exactly that this isn't that. I mean, because the struggle of a story is always going on, it seems to me, to some degree. But it's not really being drawn out exactly what the struggle is. So, if I were to kind of extrapolate, or maybe like if I was taking it out of the story myself, I would see this guy who's, like packed up in this sort of, this circumstance with these two other couples, and he's sleeping on the mat. Not only is he like downgraded in a sense that he's not part of a couple, but he's also then sleeping on the mattress. He's like really an extra, you know, he's extra and in a sense less worthy. And like if I knew how that situation was driving this other situation, a little bit more so, and understood that, basically understanding that character's motivation, I feel like this story would start to rise. I think it's there. I mean, I think I I trust us as writers, our intuition. I think we're intuitive about what a story is. And particularly when we write out of our own experience. But when we write about our own experience, we often just write about it like in the same way that we lived it. But I think what we have to do as writers is we actually have to sort of rise above and say, okay, this was my experience that I lived. Now I'm going to draw upon that experience as a writer and write a story with a protagonist who wants something, who struggles to get it, and then discovers something basically about themselves and their own existence, right? So I have to take my own experiences when I write autobiographically, and I have to basically make myself a character in the story. I have to think of myself as a character in the story, and if I am the protagonist, I have to think of myself as the protagonist who is struggling for some reason. I'm motivated to struggle. I want something, and I'm being prevented from getting it by the forces of antagonism. Those two things for everybody creates this is what we're after. So I really want everyone to take this in. This is what we're after. We want energy. We don't want words. Words are not enough. We want energy on the page. That's what we're after in a story, and that energy comes from the protagonist clashing against the forces of antagonism, right? This is two things going like this, creating energy out of that clash. This Sri Charan is a little bit like the protagonist is, he's getting up and he wants something, but everything goes along with him. Does that make sense? So it's not as diametrically opposed as we might want in order to get the kind of energy that we would get out of a story. But I think it is here. Does that
Yes.
make a little sense?
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, like nothing is happening here, right? Just some description of places and what's going on.
Well, yes, that's much more succinctly put than I put it. Yes, but yeah, nothing is happening here. That would be one way to say it. But it doesn't illustrate my point of like what should be happening. And I do want to make the argument that something is happening. I mean, it's kind of a weird esoteric argument, but I'm saying that you are intuitively going to this story and you want to write it, right? Um, because something is going on for you. You are perceiving a struggle. You're just not putting it on the page, and you as the writer have to do that. It's sort of like if I were to, provide a kind of analysis. It's sort of like this guy who's not part of either of these couples, and maybe wants that. He doesn't have this partner. So what he does is he basically tries to personify the ocean into his partner, right? He basically makes that his partner, right? He goes out and he wants this thing to be his sort of romantic partner, his reason for being. He wants a reason to be. He wants a reason to be there. He wants a reason to be. He wants all of these things, He wants to be, and he wants to connect to someone. But since that's not happening, and he's actually been excluded from any of those connections in a sense, he wants to connect with something. So that's fine. That's good. That is a motivation. Then we want to take a look at the ocean. Do we want the ocean to be as accommodating as it is? Right? So we don't want to the ocean, the forces of antagonism, nature, all other people, everything in the world that's the antagonist to what we want doesn't go along with us. Not in a story. Maybe it does sometimes in real life, I've told the story many times about me losing my wallet. I lost my wallet. I thought it was at the restaurant. I called the restaurant. They said, yes, it's here. I went and I picked it up. That's not a story,
Yeah.
right? That's not a story. Me getting what I want, not a story.
Yeah.
But I think it's a good start, and I really do like you writing about a character that's like yourself. It presents a whole new level of problems if you can understand that. And the big level of problem that it creates is when we write about ourselves as a writer, we have to make this person into a character who is serving a role in our story, and that role is the role of protagonist. I think it's a true role, but as we live our life, we don't see it that way. So, but I think it's a really fun work. I like this. I like this place. I would like to see even more details about this place. Where is it exactly?
It is Mahabalipuram. It's near Chennai.
Okay, so I
It's in
would
India.
like those. Okay, I would like all those names. I'm going to make a general plea, for everybody here who's writing, that for me as a writer, for me as a reader, you have this wealth of information and specificity that I know nothing about. One of the reasons I read, and this is true of everybody, we read in order to have experiences of other things. I don't read to, right? One of my mantras is a reader doesn't read in order to read about your experience. They read in order to have an experience. And one of the things that I want to have an experience of is the place. I'm going to tell you something, Sri Charan, probably, honestly, I probably will never go to this place. The only time I will be able to see it and imagine it is through your work. So we want to use those details. It's a simple way to say that all of you writers know India and the specificity and the details of India so well. I don't know right now whether I'll ever get to India. I wish and hope that I will be able to. But in the meantime, I want to be able to feel like I'm living there through your work. So, make those details happen.
Okay, so do you feel that way?
What's that?
I mean, do you feel like you are watching that place?
What I would say is right now I feel like I'm watching it in a generic way,
Okay.
right? It's like the places that I have gone. I mean,
Yeah.
I was, on Cape Cod for, I grew up there because my mother was a marine biologist, and I've been through all Central America and Mexico. I've been to a lot of beaches in my life. So it's like those, but I don't want it to be like those. I want it to be specifically
Okay.
like the one that you went to. So that means name it, right? Don't, you can give me some of the generic things like palm trees and coconuts, but give me the specific things that you're witnessing. Think about the place or even go to the place and make sure you pull out those specific details
Mm.
that make your place unique.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Got it.
Um, you know who does this very well in English is a writer named Paul Bowles. He writes about North Africa mostly. And when he writes about North Africa, you feel like you're in that very specific place in North Africa. So when you read those stories, you feel like you've gone there. You're usually not happy that you've gone there afterwards, but you do feel like you've gone there.
Okay.
Any questions about this piece?
Not that. Most of them have been answered already.
The one little thing that you want to look at so in this piece, the water is personified. Make sure that you let us understand that the protagonist is the one who's personifying nature. You know what I mean by personify? Basically makes nature like a person, right? So that's one of the actions of this piece is that the protagonist personifies nature. But you also want to be able to depict nature not personified, right? Because we can only understand that it isn't personified by having both indications. So we want the personification by your protagonist, that's subjective, but we also want a lot of objective views too, and probably in the majority, so that we actually see it objectively. Does that make sense? So that it's not turned into a romanticized, he's the one romanticizing the ocean. The ocean is not romantic,
Mm.
right? I mean, the ocean's the ocean, it's just water and a lot of it.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I have a question in this part. Like, it is a POV, right? I mean, while we are writing POV chapters, say, then usually the thoughts are portrayed, right? As in, if we describe the nature as being romanticized, it means the person, the narrator, I mean, the POV character is romanticizing it, right?
Right. But when we think about that, that's a great question. When we think about point of view is actually just like the camera that goes inside the character. That means we are placing the point of view, which could be anywhere, we're placing it inside the head of the protagonist. The protagonist, right, sees things basically objectively, right? They see things objectively. Like when I see, a green field, I see a green field. I might romanticize it with subjectivity and with my bias. So I add subjective bias to my point of view, but there are both of them. It's both objective and subjective. I see a green field, and I'm like, I looked out on the green field, right? That's objective. The blades of grass danced like dancers in their final act, I thought. Right? So I see a green field, okay, and then I'm seeing the grass dancing like dancers in their final act. That's subjective. You want to have both visions.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Does that make sense? So that
Yeah. Got
so that then the reader understands that it's the character who is romanticizing the grass and not the writer who is romanticizing it. Like the writer can be a god in their story, and they can just write that the grass are dancers and they are dancing around, blah, blah, blah. So the writer can do that. We have that kind of control. We don't want to do that because the reader doesn't really want to be involved in the writer's world. They want to be involved in the protagonist's world and have the experiences of the protagonist. That's a long way to explain it, but try to have both. I'm just noting that it's very romanticized, and I like the moments when you touch down on reality. Those are my bigger moments.
Yeah, got it answered.
But it's a nice piece. Yeah, so you see, I note here, then he spotted them clouds all over the sky looking like a great umbrella. Shit, he thought. Like, I like that, right? You know, like a vast umbrella unfolding in the world, blah, 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 blah. Shit, he thought. You know, so it's all this romanticism, but then he's just a regular person who thinks very simple things, right? And then he could run back, forth and back with the crawling waves. The crawling waves. Okay, waves are not crawling. Waves are waves. Okay, they don't crawl. Okay, the crawling waves or jump into the shallows of the sea and move down under the water, scrubbing himself with the salt. Or he could climb on top of the rocks of the hill and click himself. You know, like I like that. He's gonna climb up on the rocks and click himself, right? So I like the juxtaposition of this sort of romanticized vision, but then also the reality of this character. Karen, you have a question?
Hi. I had a question about point of view that you were explaining. Can you explain it in a little more detail? What as a writer we should aim for in the point of view?
Sure. So I think it's a little bit complicated because we have, as writers, we have many more tools than the movies, for example. The point of view is a bit like a camera. So it's something that we want to locate, and it's important for us to locate it someplace, not just have it move all over, you know, continuously, because the problem with that is that it's confusing for the reader. I often say it this way, the truth of our lives, all of us, right, as we live our entire lives, we live our entire lives with one point of view. Ours. So that's a way to think of it in a physical sense. All of us, every human being has only one point of view. We might imagine we know what other people are thinking. We're usually wrong, right? We might imagine that we understand, you know, that we can fly in our imagination I can fly from here in Oregon to India. No, I can't, okay? I see the things that are in front of me. I hear the things that are around me. You know, I taste the things that I eat, right? So we have one point of view. Because of that, we also want to imitate in our art essentially a located point of view. There is a lot of discussion about single point of view characters or multiple point of view characters. I don't really want to discuss that, but you know, we can do that, but we want to do it in a way that the reader does not become confused. So point of view is really illustrated in its words. It's a point in space of view, and we like to establish it. I would generally suggest, as we're, you know, if we're beginning our writing, to try and establish that within one character so that the reader feels located in one character. That creates a kind of verisimilitude with their own life, right? They get to understand the world of your story in the same way that they understand their own world with one point of view. And from within that point of view, your character can see forward, right? They can hear things that are all around them. They touch things that their hands are on, right? They feel things that their hands are on. What else? They smell things that are cooking in the other room, right? They think their thoughts. They do not read the minds of other people. So when we pay attention to those details, then we create that sense of locating point of view. However, when we don't pay attention to those details of point of view, then we actually the reader feels disjointed. So like here's an example. Maybe I'll take Sri Charan's piece. I was like, I stood on the dock and looked out over the ocean. My father walked up behind me. Right? Did you notice that? I'm looking out at the ocean. My father walked up behind me. Where's the point of view? I can't see behind myself, right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
So when I did that, I actually just left the point of view. I looked out over the vast ocean. My father walked up behind me. When I write the sentence, my father walked up behind me, I'm not the character looking out at the ocean anymore. I'm the narrator who knows the story up here. So I just had 2 points of view right next to each other. Right? So for everyone, I'll say it again. It's like, I looked out over the ocean. That's 1 point of view. I looked out over the ocean. My father walked up behind me is the writer up here. So I just took the reader from 1 point of view. I grabbed them violently by the scruff of the neck, and I threw them into another point of view. And my argument is that's not good for the reader. What we do usually with points of view, and let's say between the character point of view, the I that's looking out, and the writer who's also an I in a first person narration, right? We do it for a duration of time. So we write, I looked out over the ocean, the breeze, it hit my face and smelled of salt and rotting fish, right? So I'll spend a whole paragraph like that. And then I'll go into the next paragraph and I will switch it. I'll go into the next paragraph and I'll say, in those days, I was a young man looking for a reason, right? So now I use this sentence to say, I'm switching points of view. I was this character looking out at the ocean, romanticizing the ocean. And now in my next paragraph, which I've gone like this, and I see it as a chunk, I write, I was a young man then looking for a reason. I had no job. I went from place to place, blah, 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 blah. So now I'm writing a whole paragraph in the narrator's point of view. And then I will go back, because human beings are pattern makers. I wrote the paragraph in the character's point of view. I wrote the paragraph of the narrator, and then I'm going to go back into the story of the character. And in that way, I start to create a pattern that the reader is going to be able to say, oh, I'm in good hands. But if I don't do that, then the reader feels like they're not being taken care of, and they basically leave our story, which is the one thing we never want them to do. Did that make any sense, Karen?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's a great question. The thing that I found in my writing career is that basically working with point of view has been the thing that I've had to do the most. So it's I mean, it's cliche to say it's a muscle, right? It's an imaginative muscle, and we have to exercise it, and we have to try and do it and do things with point of view in order to get stronger at it. The thing is, what happens, kind of the difference between people who can write stories and organize stories in this way using points of view, whether it's a single point of view or multiple points of view, or a character and a narrator and all of those things. The difference between all those people and kind of everyone else is that most writers, they don't even know that point of view really exists. They don't think it's important. They don't pay any attention to it, and they think, well, I can already write because I write emails and I journal and I do all these things. So they are writing at one level here. And then writers are using these other tools, particularly point of view, to organize their work so that readers can understand them and feel comfortable in them and become absorbed in them in a way that's at a higher level. Let's look at the next piece.
Yeah, thanks for this.
Thank you, Sharon. And keep writing some pieces like this. Working in first person is very difficult in regard to point of view. I'm going to say something a little bit complex. Hopefully you follow me a little bit. But when we write in first person, there are two first persons in the story. One is a character, the I that looks out over the sea, and the other is another I who's the narrator. Those are two different points of view. When we write in first person, it's very difficult for us to organize the difference between these two. And therefore, writing in first person is a great place to experiment and get stronger with the differentiation of point of view. You have two things named the same, I and I, but they are completely different. They are separated by time. They think differently. They experience the world differently. And working with those two can be, really a really great experiment. Ram, let's take a look at your piece.
Sure.
Maybe you can read this first page for us,
Yeah,
and then tell us a
will.
little bit what you're going for.
Yeah. Janu launched on the bed, reading Triumph of Persephonia, the last installment in the 5-book Athenopolis Year 3434 series. Every 13-year-old was reading it. It was certainly more interesting than medieval Indian history 1300 to 1700, required reading for history class. Janu was on page 386, where the 15-year-old Persephonia was laying out the new code of conduct for the denizens of Athenopolis, having just wrested control of the land, ably supported by her band of adolescents. Tung, tung, ting, ting, tung, the brass bell rang from across the corridor. Janu rolled her eyes. Mom will never let up on the daily puja, she thought. She threw a pillow at the half-open door of the room and it slammed shut. Turning around on the bed, she put her feet up on the headboard and continued reading. She had barely read a paragraph when the door opened. Janu covered her face with the open book and groaned, "No, Mom." The smell of shikakai powder reached Janu before Dharini, her mother, did. "Oh, Mom, why can't you use shampoo and conditioner like normal people?" The book was lifted from Janu's face and the smell of burning incense and camphor joined the shikakai to assault her nostrils. "Ooh." Janu crinkled her nose. She saw Dharini take a pinch of vibhuti from the puja thali to smear on her forehead. "I haven't bathed." Janu grinned and pushed her face towards her mother. Dharini jerked her hand away, muttering, "Abhishtu, Abhishtu." "That's too mild, Mom. I'm sure your angry gods want you to use stronger cuss words. Shall I teach you some?"
Okay, good. Thank you, Ram. So tell us a little bit about this piece.
So I started writing this in response to a submissions call, which asked for a young adult kind of fiction based on history or mythology. So I started writing this in response to that. And this is about Sita and how or what Sita was before she married Rama. That's what I'm trying to convey here, because she was a young adult when she got married. We know her story after she did, but we don't know what happened until then. So this is trying to explore that.
And in this story, remind me, I think that the mother will then start telling the story of Sita. Right?
That's correct.
Right. Okay.
So this is one structure that I'm exploring. This is one structure that I'm exploring, trying to put the past through the lens of the present. So this is one structure that I'm exploring. And if it doesn't work, then I'll probably try something else. Maybe try just narrating the story directly. So
Right. Okay, so one thing that occurs to me in this story, like, so when I read it, it felt a bit of a setup, but I didn't think about it in these terms. So
okay.
when we look at a story, we generally will see that we want to be able to have an identified protagonist and then an antagonist, right? So here we want to, it seems like you're establishing Janu as the protagonist, and the mother's going to come in and then basically tell this story
Yeah.
of Sita, and that's sort of like challenging this girl in some way. One of the ways I put this sometimes is that when we have a story, right? So we go back to this idea of the protagonist meets the antagonist. The way we create energy out of that story, that diametric opposition. So there are a couple things that, I mean, I just basically use physical principles to describe it because stories finally inspire readers because of the physicality of them, not because of the esoteric side of them, right? It's the physicality that makes us feel things in life, right? So it's the physicality of our stories, the representation of one force meeting the diametric opposition of another force that makes us feel something. So I used to make this joke that I don't know if you know American boxing at all, but I was like, it's you need to have equal forces. And I used to say like, okay, no one's going to pay to watch. Okay, I had a politician, Dick Cheney, fight Mike Tyson, who is one of the most phenomenal boxers, in the world at his time, right? So you don't want this little scrubby Dick Cheney fighting Mike Tyson, I would joke, because it's clear what's going to happen. It's basically an unequal struggle. And it doesn't matter whether the protagonist is the one that's really strong and then the antagonist is weak. It's basically, the straw man, a straw man argument?
Absolutely.
That rhetorical idea. Right. To me, it's kind of interesting is that, I came up with these ideas independently, right? Well, I didn't come up with the idea of the straw man argument, of course, but I came up with these ideas about writing stories independently of the straw man. But basically, it's like a straw man argument, right? There's one point of view, and then there's the straw man who they basically have a point of view so that this one basically beats it down and wins, right? That's a little bit what it's like when we have a protagonist and an antagonist that are unequal. And in this story, the main thing is I feel like Janu doesn't have a chance, right?
Right. Yeah.
So it's not really an equal struggle. So when I get to the point where she's reading this, basically, as I understand it, a piece of trash, triumph of, this kind of Greek mythologized crapola, right?
Yeah.
And then she's going to be faced with this other story from Hindu mythology, and it's going to totally beat her down, right? And she's going to say, "Thanks, Mom." It's really another level, Ram. What I like about it is, like a story like this should kind of tell us what we want what we're going for in our stories. They have to be this good. They have to be this good. It's not that you can't write this story. You can. And even, depending on your audience, when your audience, okay, so me, I would pay to see Dick Cheney fight Mike Tyson because I want to see Dick Cheney get his ass kicked. He might be dead at this point. I'm sorry. Rest in peace if you are. Okay, but I want to see that. So I am the right audience for that. You may have an audience that wants this poor girl who's reading this trash book to get, pummeled by the authority and grandeur of, this tale that she's about to hear. I'm sure there's an audience that wants that. That's not a story to me. That's not a story that does the best things that a story can do. I do kind of call that propaganda, Propaganda is when you write a story whose outcome is one that the reader already expects and wants.
Right.
That's the same. That's true of the straw man argument. When, if I, if I already agree with the person who's making this argument, I want to see them meet a straw man because it makes me feel good and powerful that another straw man gets beaten up. Great. I love it. I think there's a higher aspiration for a story that has equal. And then what it does is it arrives someplace that we don't expect. And that is the objective of art, it seems to me, to the best that we can do it.
Right.
It actually, to me, it gets to a really big issue about art and why we're writing it, right? So what we do, I think, as writers and as story writers, is that we want to try and all we're trying to do, we don't even know what happens. How can we know? Because we haven't even worked it out yet. But we basically use the story as a mechanism for our own discovery. And we do it by creating a protagonist that is strong and forceful, and putting it against an antagonist that is strong and forceful, and having the duration of struggle go on, and then finding out where we arrive.
Yeah. Got it. Yeah.
That's what I think we're trying to do. We're not trying to basically construct something that reconfirms what we already think.
Right. Got it.
It's sort of idealized. It's a little bit idealized, of course. I mean, there's going to be, obviously we have our bias. So, but that's something that does occur to me in this piece. When I get to, I like this girl here on her bed and doing her reading, incongruously. I mean, I picked up right away about this sort of Greek thing, and I'm like, oh my God, why is she doing that? And I like that, but then she's so obviously the straw man, right?
Okay. I got it. Yeah, I can see where to fix it. I got that. This is very, very helpful. Thank you.
What was a great example of this, but this style is Princess Bride, if you've seen that movie.
I haven't.
If you haven't, it's a Hollywood movie, American Hollywood movie, but Princess Bride, it's on Netflix and all, but basically it's about storytelling. And it's a great example. There's a kid and a grandfather, and the kid at first is like, the grandfather says, I'm going to tell you a story. He's like, I don't want to hear a story. That's da 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 da. And the grandfather starts spinning this tale, right? And it's just so amazing and wonderful that, eventually, of course, I mean, we know how it's going to go. It's Hollywood. But, at the end, the kid's like, what happens next? What happens next? And we like that. We like that story. The idea and the bigger issue is, right, stories are how we connect to both our people and ourselves and understand ourselves. So there's a powerful thing in stories, and that is representing, sort of the idea of the mom and probably the idea that you want to bring into it, and that's all good. But what you have to do is make sure that the daughter is not just a straw man.
Got it.
Yeah.
It
really means thinking about her a little bit more,
Yes.
Not just making her a patsy.
Yeah.
Right.
She's a patsy. The way I had originally thought about it, she's a patsy. So I think I hadn't realized it, but now I can see it in black and white. So I have a question here, Otis.
Sure.
So here, essentially, what I'm trying to do is this is more of a frame structure, right? Because there is an outer frame of the mother and daughter, and then there is something that is happening. When I started writing it in the frame structure, the one thing that I was wrestling with was obviously because of this, there is a very drastic shift in this scene. So we are going from mother-daughter contemporary and back to thousands of years back, that story that is coming. And there, the way I had thought of the story, there is going to be a little bit of back and forth. So there is an episode that is narrated, and then we come back to the mother-daughter, then it goes back to one episode. So in a 5,000 word story, which is what this is supposed to be, is this shifting back and forth in a frame story, does that create confusion, or is it possible to make it in a manner that the transition seems natural?
You know, it can be done. I mean, if you watch that movie Princess Bride, you'll see that it is done. It's done just a little bit. I mean, I think maybe one of the things that happens here is that you kind of do some things to personify the daughter, but not enough. Which could mean that you could just actually, you could still have it be an envelope. So there are different ways to think about the structure, right? So there's an envelope where you have the girl in the beginning, the mother will come, tell her the story, and then we'll have the girl and the mother at the end, right? There's nothing wrong with that. That's an envelope structure. You just might want to be quicker about it. See, what you do here is you actually put a real person kind of on the page, but you only do it kind of. If you're not going to do it quickly, right?
Okay, right. Okay, got it. Okay.
I think that's really the answer here. There's a couple little things here in terms of establishing the point of view. So maybe it's a little bit that you kind of both go, you kind of go into her point of view and also don't a little bit. It's kind of a delicate thing to point out, but like if you just want her to be a surly teenager, then just write her as a quick stereotyped surly teenager. And then the mother comes in and then she can be a strict mom, right? And she's like, this is a story that you need to hear. And then she tells the story and it better be good, right? So you've thrown down the gauntlet. You know, this girl is this way and the mother's coming in to correct her. And then you want to make sure that something else happens at the end, right? It's still, you don't want to just be like, oh, and now you've been corrected, right? That's not, that we can't have a flat line as our story. So the mother comes in and then we come to something else, a different kind of relationship between the mother and daughter at the end, right? Because that's what it's going to be about, because that's what the story is about. The story is about characters on the page, the daughter and the mother. The story that the mother tells, and then we return to the daughter and mother, and where have we arrived? There's nothing wrong with that structure.
Okay.
You are kind of doing it, you're doing it that you want to create the straw man, basically. Like you rather than just getting that done, right?
Yeah. The last thing I want to do is propaganda. No, I don't want propaganda. I don't want to make it a propaganda. Because, I mean, it isn't convincing, right? I mean, the propaganda isn't convincing.
Well, it's not convincing, and it also doesn't really challenge us or challenge anyone else, right? But what we want to do is we want to challenge ourselves. And you can see that, like, even the structure where if you just have it be brief, you know, Janu slammed the door and jumped on her bed. Her mother followed. Listen, young lady, this is a story you have to hear. It's like, I don't want to hear it. You will hear it. Boom, lay it out. And then what do we get to at the end? So you've really thrown down the gauntlet in the beginning. This story better deliver. And now you better deliver.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that we want to do as writers. We want to throw a gauntlet down, and then we want to be like, uh-oh, am I going to be able to deliver? You know, is the story this good or not? I don't know. Now you have to make it that good.
That's a good place to be. When I have that doubt, it's a good place to be, because the way I see it, Otis, there are three phases to be in. One is when I know that it is bad. The other is I have that doubt. The other is where I feel it is good. It's better to be in the middle ground, because if I feel it is good, I'm probably wrong.
Yeah. A couple little things in terms of getting into point of view. It might not be necessary for this story, but if we have Janu lounged on the bed, okay, so that's, would you say that we're in her point of view, or are we distant from her point of view?
So this I think is the narrator seeing her doing something and stating that.
Exactly. So we're already getting the point of view that's established in this piece
Yeah.
is one of a narrator looking at her.
Yeah.
So that kind of objectification, if you're writing it with point of view, I don't think you were going to. I actually think you're going to use that objectification. You got Janu slammed the door and her mother followed her. That's all narration, right? That's narrator. I just wrote narrator. I'm not bothering to try to get into her point of view. The mother said, "You're going to sit down and listen to this story." It's like, not another one of your stories. It's like, sit down. Boom, tell your story. But in this case, you're kind of doing this is what I mean about doing it sort of halfway, right? So this is going back to Karen's question too, and for all of us. If we want to write point of view and establish the point of view with the protagonist, because it's the protagonist's story, right? Then we want to get inside the body. So rather than Janu lounged on the bed, Janu lay back into the pillows, right? She turned over and looked at her clock. 8 o'clock at 8 p.m. Her parents would be asleep by 10. She will have snuck out to the club on blah, 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 blah Avenue in downtown Mumbai by 12 a.m. right? Or something, whatever.
Right.
But anyway, I'm going into her point of view because it's her story, right? Okay, so she picked up Triumph of Persophonia, the last, and then the last installment, right? So that's actually that's just a definition that the narrator is coming in to give the reader. That's fine. It's helpful to us to understand what we're dealing with. They just come in, get it done, get out, right? All her friends were reading it, not every 13-year-old, right? So see how I'm saying if we want to be in her point of view, we want to say all her friends were reading it. This little it was. I'm just gonna give this to you, Ram. Everybody. Actually, I just told someone else this too. It's on my hit list. We never start a sentence with "it was." Okay? It was a dark night says the dark night was a dark night. We don't do that. But we might say she loved this book. It was more interesting. Because when we write, it was certainly more interesting than medieval history, we don't know who thinks that, right? We want to be in her point of view, and we want to associate the point of view with her. All her friends were reading it, and she thought it was definitely more interesting than medieval Indian history, 1300 to 1700. Oh my God, right? Janu was on page 386. Janu turned the page to 386. So in a way, this is a little comment just on weak verbs, but it's also, we want the subject of our sentence and our protagonist to be associated with strong verbs. When we write the antagonist, we want to do the antagonist being associated with strong verbs. That's just, going down to the sort of micro level, but it does help us. And by doing these little things actually with our language, it helps our imagination. Because when I write Janu was on page 386, guess what? When I write that, it's not that it's lazy, I'm distant. My imagination of the scene is distant. Right. When I write Janu turned the page to 386, that specificity makes me close. I'm close to her experience. I'm imagining it. And the same thing happens for the reader. The reader can either be distant or they read the words and they're close. And that's what we're doing. So we basically lead the reader with the way we imagine the story. Do we imagine it from a distant point of view, the narrators, or do we imagine it from a close point of view, the protagonist and character?
Yeah.
And that is a tool that we use. And we sometimes want to be close If it's the character's story, then we want to be close. But if it's the narrator's story, and why the heck do we want to read a narrator's story? I don't know. But if it's the narrator's story, then we might be distant for the majority of the work. A little bit complicated, but what we tend to do is if it's the character's story, the protagonist's story, not the narrator's, we basically make the narrator subordinate to the protagonist. If it's the narrator's story, then we make the protagonist subordinate to the narrator.
Yeah.
And you could argue that here you haven't decided.
I haven't decided. You're right.
Thank you, Ram. I think it's
Thank you.
I do like the idea of this construction. I like that you're taking it on. Again, your intuition, I think, is right. So you throw down the gauntlet, you make it happen. The story is going to have a kind of corrective measure, but go back to this. The daughter does something, it doesn't matter what. The mother is like, you're going to be corrected. Here's the story. It should correct them both.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because both of these characters, they're just being put here equally. They both have to be changed.
Yeah.
And if you can
True.
do that, you will have accomplished a great deal.
Yes. No, this was fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm looking at it
Yeah.
with new eyes. Thank you.
Madhavi, let's look at your story.
Hi, Otis.
Hi, Madhavi. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Great. Okay, let's have you read the first page and then tell us a little bit about what you're after.
Okay, so should I tell the background first and then I'll read it later?
No, why don't you read the first page and then
Okay.
I don't know whatever you want to do.
Sure. Okay, I'll read it first. The Life and Times of Robbie DeMello. I was 16 years old when I saw her for the first time, and the moment got etched in my memory forever, as did she. Later, when I told her about it, she felt it was so silly, but at that time, it was the most beautiful sight. Where did you meet? Soundarya asked impatiently. Oh, we didn't meet for a long time. I saw her from afar. In the market at a little distance from our school, she was enjoying a rainbow-colored ice gola with her friends. It was a hot summer day just before my final exams. I was returning from an extra class, and there she was, right in front of me, enjoying the life to the fullest. She was so happy and content in that moment that it touched my heart. And then, even as I realized that I was staring at a girl in a public place, her eyes melted and the orange color dropped on her shirt. She looked down at her shirt disapprovingly, her brows knitted into a cute little frown. Oh, that must have spoiled her dress, Sandy commented. Not just a dress, but her school uniform. I found out later that she was a new admission in the 9th grade, 1 year my junior. I used to stay near the school and hence got to see her a lot often. Her regular classes were still going on. I was enthralled by her innocence, her beauty, and the cheerful aura she exuded. I was so distracted that I forgot to attend the first paper of my final exam. What? Aman and Sandy echoed each other. But if Sandy started and Aman interrupted. Don't call her Amma yet. Why? She asked, confused.
Okay, great. And tell us a little bit about what you're after here.
Yeah, so last time when we heard from Sandy and Aman, Sandy was abducted. I have actually jumped 4 chapters to come to this. So in the meanwhile, Sandy was rescued by Prasanna and Aman. She was admitted to a hospital where Prasanna blurts out that she is his daughter actually. So Aman is quite impressed. He says, I'm quite touched and that you think of her as a daughter. But he says, no, she's actually my daughter. She's my biological daughter. And then there's a confrontation between Sandy and Prasanna, where she accuses him that you deserted my mom because she gave birth to a girl child. Is that so? So then he says it's not the case because ours was a love marriage.
Okay,
Then
I like it. Wait, Madhavi.
Yeah.
Okay, I can see you're got this plot in your I think, but did you send me a note that said that you were after something here in terms of what you were trying
Yes,
to
that is why
accomplish
I
with this
jumped those
with the
four.
writing?
Yeah, that is why I jumped those 4 chapters, because I was last time when we discussed my writing, we were discussing about the 2 eyes. So here I'm making, so here Prasanna is narrating his backstory. So what I want to ask is whether I am doing justice to his eye, the way I've written
Okay.
this. So that was the question I wanted to ask. So that's
Okay.
why I've skipped the other parts of the story that I'll be sharing later with you.
Okay. So I think one of the problems maybe for me in reading this was that I was kind of confused. So I'll tell you something true about me is that I read a lot. I read a lot of
I
stuff,
understand
and I
that.
don't remember
Must have
everything,
forgotten.
and I,
Yeah.
I don't follow the lines of argument between people's stories.
Yeah.
I'm I'm what's called a lazy reader. So basically, the way I am is I basically open it up. But one thing I'm great at is the willing suspension of disbelief. I open up a work. It doesn't matter whether it's the thing, like whatever, whether I'm reading the ingredients on a box of whatever cereal, or whether I'm reading, a psychological dissertation about blah blah blah. I just focus on it. It makes me I'm lazy. I don't want to do any work, but I'm riveted by the words that are in front of my eyes. So I didn't have all that stuff in my mind. And my comments on this piece might not be that useful in some ways because there might be some of the work that would already have been very well established in your story
Yeah.
that I'm basically noting the lack of here, right? And
Sure.
and that's primarily like I don't know who these characters are. So that's the big problem, and I don't see them. And really, it illustrates. But Javi, it might not be that useful to you, but maybe I can go ahead and I'll make my comments such as they are, so that we can at least take some ideas from them, even
Sure.
though it might not be personally that useful to you. But you can see. It's but I think it still can be useful because if you're talking about a section here of 5 pages in which people are just talking, we have to realize that we say that talk is cheap. It may or may not be cheap, I don't know, but one thing it is just sound. And sound is very sound is not physical basically for us. We don't perceive it physically. And what happens in this piece is that I don't have any physical grounding into these characters, what they look like, their actions, what they do. So I'm just actually very confused. It's a little bit like going back to the idea of point of view and locating the reader in point of view. When we locate the reader in point of view, then the reader sees things through the eyes and the other sensations of their character. And the things that the character sees, smells, touches, etc., those sensory details are actually physical things. And when we write the words of those physical things, the reader imagines them in their mind. They imagine physical things. The trouble here is in this longish piece where they're only talking, there's no physical grounding, no what we call concrete words. So there's two kinds of words, concrete words and abstract words. Concrete words are like brick. Abstract words are like love. Dialogue is somewhere in between, right? Because when we speak, we might be using concrete words or abstract words. And so we can mitigate some of the negative effects of dialogue if in dialogue we have our characters use concrete words. I think that if we and even going back to Sri Charan's work, using details. Details are concrete. They drive the imagination of the reader into this kind of feeling of specificity. It puts them onto the page. So if we look at the dialogue here, we'd probably class most of the language here as being abstract. And so the reader has even less to hold on to. I'm trying to 21 bamboo stalks of Rashma, I think. Is that right? Anyway, she's a playwright. So when she writes a play, this is, I want us to all kind of conceptualize it like this. When she writes a play, she may write, the majority will just be dialogue. But what's the difference between her play and this work? I guess I'll make that a rhetorical question. The answer is that there are actors saying the lines. There are people standing on the stage saying things. And the audience gets to both hear them say it and see them saying it. When we write, however, with no performance and no actors, we have to supply all those visual cues. We have to put the actors on the page, and we do it with language. The old man put down his newspaper, looked up and said, "That was the day I met your mother." Right? We have to put the old man on there. We have to use those words. If this were, and this is not a bad way to think of it either, if this were a radio show, right? And so now we have no actors. We're just listening to it on the radio. It's a radio show, a podcast. Podcasts, all the rage right now. What would they be doing in the dialogue, right? What words would they be using so that we could see what was going on? So that's my larger comment, Madhavi, is that unfortunately I mean,
Yeah, because the time and place and everything else, as you mentioned, that has been dealt with in the previous chapter, and this chapter opens like this. So probably I should change the structure of the chapters so that the chapter opens in a concrete way.
Right. I mean, you just jumped into the dialogue, and then it's really fun to write dialogue, and I can tell that you know your plot, and I can tell that you know your characters. I had no doubt that you knew your characters. And I had no doubt that you knew what was going on. But I didn't know what was going on.
Yes.
It was actually, I thought that at a certain point, I was like, she knows this story so well, and she knows these characters so well that she thinks that Amma, Aman, all these names, they have meaning to you because you know the entire character. The thing is, though, when I read Amma, I see nothing. I have no idea at all who I'm dealing with whatsoever.
Aman means peace in Hindi, so it's actually based on that. The peace that is lacking in his life, the larger picture.
Yes, and there are some things with the Hindi names that I think you'll probably all have to give me a tutorial at some point so I can understand all the naming. I look forward to it, or maybe I should just read about it. I can tell that they build and they also convey information and historical information. They also have meanings, and they have I get that. So I need a better education in regard to that. Also, for all of you writers too, who are using Hindi names that have these meanings, do understand, and determine for yourself who your audience is. If your audience is going to be someone who's not going to understand that, then you must help them. That's a good job for the narrator. The narrator comes in and helps. Okay, be a helper, please. But if you don't want a larger audience, like if you don't want poor old me to be part of your audience, which I cannot understand why you wouldn't. If you don't want me as your audience, then maybe you don't need to do that. But if you do want a broader audience, people who don't understand these nuances in the naming, then do help us. I never think it hurts. I personally really like both foreign language, and I also like learning a great deal when I read. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons that I read. I get to read an engaging story and learn at the same time. So don't hold back from doing a little bit of teaching. someone who already knows the meaning of the names, they experience, you know, that wonderful sense of confirmation bias. They just feel all smart about themselves, right? So there's no harm done by helping the reader. But anyway, that was the main issue here, is that we just have to always remember, and even Madhavi, this is a 5-page dialogue with just dialogue. You are going to want to ground down into concrete detail. Concrete detail includes human beings, it includes details, all of these things. You're going to want to ground down in those throughout the course of this dialogue. And it does point to another problem sometimes with our dialogues, is that when we have characters just engaged in dialogue, it can seem like it's being done for the purpose of exposition, basically explaining stuff to us. It's difficult to sustain long sections of dialogue where the characters aren't doing anything. And in general, we want characters to reveal themselves through their actions. There's a lot more to say about dialogue too, in terms of making it engaging. But my basic rule is anything that's said, that's dialogue that we're quoting, should either reveal character or advance the story, or ideally both. So that puts some constraints on us, you know, basically saying that our dialogue has to be really good. The reader has to be getting more out of dialogue than just the words on the page. It can't just be, another way to express it is, it can't just be text. It also has to have subtext. So it has to tell the reader more than just what's being said. The other thing, in terms of dialogue, I'm just giving you the sort of the hit list for when we're writing dialogue. So when I, at Stanford, when I grabbed John LaRue and I pushed him up against the wall and I said, "By God, John, please tell me 3 things I can really use." He said, "Only write backstory when it's absolutely necessary." That was one. Another thing he said was, dialogue is something characters do to each other, which is basically a way to say that dialogue is always motivated by the character. And probably a number of you have heard what I've always quoted, David Mamet, who said, "A character might not say what they mean, but they always say something to get them what they want." Which again means that every character in the dialogue can't be, as Ram, you know, we might cast his character as a patsy. We can't have any patsies there who are just going, "Oh, gee willikers, tell me more," or "That's so interesting," or "Oh." No, we don't have any patsies in our dialogue. Every character has to represent their own motivation and be trying to get what they want. And then I will add that the other thing that I think characters bring to dialogue is wanting to reveal themselves, wanting to be known. So how are they saying something that lets themselves be known? Because I think that is one of the base things that human beings want. So we can apply that, but Madhavi, like I say, it's kind of generalized. There's somewhat generalized comments that I think you could bring these to bear on this dialogue and raise it up. But I did walk into it. Like I said, I'm like, what am I? This is, you know the expression "a deer in the headlights." You might, I don't know if you have that very often in India, but here we have a lot of deer. And so you're driving along and the headlights showing the deer's like this. That deer, that's like me when I read. I'm like a deer in the headlights when I read. I just go like that.
I
It's
had
kind of a
another
good thing
question,
and a bad thing. Yeah.
if you allow. the thing is, since this is a flashback, I had two ways of doing it. Either this way, where Prasanna tells and the kids go on asking questions, and they sort of keep themselves relevant, or the other thing is like dive into the flashback and uh, from the narrator's point of view. So I thought this way will do justice to the story more, since I didn't want to let go of Aman and Sandy because they are the primary characters in the whole story. I cannot have chapters and chapters where they are missing from the scene. Or would that make more impact? What would do more justice to the story, the backstory? Because that is crucial if we have to move forward in the story. Aman needs to know about his past. And there has to be, I have to bring in a shift in the characters' interpersonal relationship also.
Right. Well, I don't have a great answer for you, but the essential thing for stories is that they have momentum. So basically, we start a story and it has momentum going forward. When we have a flashback, we stop that momentum.
Yes.
So I'm making this little square. Here's our little square. This is the flashback. The flashback, basically, we stop the momentum of the story and we go back in time. This flashback has to develop momentum and have momentum in the same way that the story primary did, right? So we can say the primary story one is this story. This becomes story two. It has to be just as good and dynamic and engaging as the first story, right? And it has to advance the plot of the first story. Because we have momentum going here, we introduce a flashback, and then we carry on, we go back to our story. And this flashback has to raise the stakes of the new story, of the old story. So it has to be exactly relevant to the moment that you come to here, you break. So we see this in movies. So, the character, they're doing this, they rob a bank, and then suddenly the car goes over a cliff. Great place to have a backstory. Here we have a backstory, and we're in the garage. And the guy's tinkering around, we're like, why are we getting this now? Why are we getting this now? This is crazy. We're getting this guy in a garage with his car, And he's like, and then he goes like this, and then out come wings from the car. He's like, and then we go back to him, like this, and he goes, the wings come out in the car. Does that make sense? The flashback has to be just as exciting, just as good as the story, and it has to raise the stakes on the story. It has to be relevant to the moment. That's my strict, the gods of story that dictate everything we do. That's what they say. And it's not easy. So I don't have a good answer for you about the flashback. If you do the flashback, I think you need to do it like that. If you decide to do it in dialogue, the dialogue also has to be, we have to retain the momentum. So that means we're going like this. Then we go into this period of dialogue. And that's why I say that every moment of dialogue has to reveal character and advance the story. It has to be just as dynamic. So if you're treating it as like backstory, if you're treating it basically like backstory that just has to be covered, sort of developmental work or something like that, it's hard to make that dynamic. But that's the standard. We have to make our dialogue. If it's dialogue, that means it's part of the prime story. It's occurring in dialogue. We can't just suddenly say, well, we're going to take a little break and engage in some exposition and dialogue here for 5 pages. We can't do that. So we have to make a way to either make it dynamic and advance the story, or the other thing we do is we work stuff in. We work stuff in with like details, right? So, for example, if you wanted to, let's say I go to go to Rashma's play thing. I have a character walk out on stage. He walks this way, he walks that way. Clearly, he's anxious and waiting, walking around. He walks to the backstage, and he picks up this. There's a picture that's facing the back wall, right? So he goes back there, he picks it up, he looks at it, he puts it down, right? Now it's facing the audience, and it's a woman, right? He walks away, and then he walks back, and he puts it down on the table flat. Then the doorbell rings, right? So I'm basically communicating that there's a backstory between this guy and this woman through the actions on the stage. Also, because we know it's a story and the doorbell rings, we know it has something to do with her, right? And now we also know why he was walking around anxiously. We know the whole story. Do I need to know exactly what the backstory was? That she said this, that he gave her wilted flowers, that she rejected those wilted flowers, that there was a dove flying that fell to its death? No, I don't have to include all of that. It doesn't matter because it's not part of the story. You're dealing with all the right problems, though, Madhavi. I can see that you're really trying to grapple with it. You're like, I want to get this in here. And you're saying to yourself, how do I do it? This is exactly what writers do. This is what we do. We are problem solvers. We're like, I want to tell this story. You are driven to tell this story. You're like, how do I get this in here? What do I mean, we have just a couple of choices, really. We can either write it in scene, which is what this is, or we can write it in summary, which is basically kind of what flashback is, or we can omit it completely. Those are our three choices, and you're grappling with that and trying to figure out what's best. Sounds perfect. Sounds like you're doing everything you should be doing.
Thank you. Figure it out.
Yeah, thank you. You've thrown me to the wolves. Yeah, thank you very much. Let's see. Deepa.
Hi, Otis. Hi, this is me, Rashma. Did you get my piece? I submitted on 28th. I don't see it here, so I'm just worried. No.
Yes, you're right to be worried. I did not get that.
It's perhaps reaching your trash box or something. I don't know.
Yeah. I actually I can put those directions into my things. So whenever, no, I'm kidding. That's a joke. Yeah, I didn't see it. I don't know. It could have gone into my junk. I never look at my junk. There's thousands of things in there. Can you try and send it to me again for next week?
I'll do that.
And maybe send me an email if you can do it right very soon. Then I'll know even before we get up. Well, I'll know very quickly that you've done it. And then we'll see if there's some problem. Maybe it's the wrong address.
Right.
Abhinav, were you going to say something?
Yes. I think Ram or someone had a question whether they were asking whether other people got the feedback, the marked up PDF that you send. And Ram had this question. So I'm not sure if you sent your feedback to him or whether it was just not delivered.
Okay. Hey, Ram, or if I've done your piece and for some reason I haven't sent it back to you, just send me a quick email and I'll try and do that.
No. I got your feedback, Otis. I was actually telling Reshma that in case she hasn't received your feedback, it probably means that it didn't hit your mailbox or maybe.
Okay. I misread that then.
No problem.
Okay.
So the other thing that I had was that we are at the 1.5 hour mark. I think you've covered 3 pieces so far, Otis, right?
Okay. Yeah, we can. If I can do either, I would. I can either do the next. There's 2 more pieces. One of them was a little bit late. There was one that was quite late. Also, you might be here, but I was not even able to look at that. So, I really, outside of my little parameters to do my reading, I don't even look at email. So it was only by mistake that I even looked at it, really. that I knew that it existed. Um, so it's up to you, Abhinav. I have a couple little notes that I wouldn't mind sort of just throwing out to everybody, and that will take a little while, and we could do that, and then I could get to these next two pieces next week and come back to them.
Let's do that. I think that way we know for sure that we'll have 2 or 3 pieces, including Rashma's piece once she resends it. And
Okay.
we can then break today on, your notes that you wanted to share.
Okay, great. Let's do that, and then we'll try and be. It's so hard for me not to dig into little issues once I get going on a story. So we'll try and be a little bit better and just like hit the major issues and then move on. I really enjoyed hearing the first pages, though. I think that works well. And then Abhinav, I think we should keep talking about how to make all the pieces available to everyone, so that if other people do want to read them, it could be Google Docs or something like that. But I would really, what would be great in this whole thing is because really there are many among you who have heard, the things that I've said many times, and what happens is I just keep saying them over and over again, which is a little bit like annoying.
Right.
But to have other people.
Yeah, I'm going to discuss this with a couple of people, and this time I think by the middle of the week or so, I'll send you some notes on and some thoughts, and then we can see, whether that works or we need to make changes to those.
Okay, great. In the meantime, of course, it's definitely better for me to just get things sent to me somehow, either through a clearinghouse or directly from people, because I can't click around Google Docs. I'm at my limit with computer use, that's for sure. Okay, let's take a look at these notes that I drew up. So this is a little comment. Like these are concepts, but so what's happened with me in my work over many years is that I always could type. Okay, so I started out as a typist, but what I wanted to do was I wanted to write stories. So I grappled and I went to workshops and I've heard a lot of things and I read a lot and I wrote a lot, and I've been doing this now since I was a sophomore in high school anyway, when I wrote my first short story. And so it's a lifelong thing for me. And what I think I can offer you all is ways to maybe not have to spend as much time as I spent. I mean, and that totally depends on you being open to listening to what I have to share and then being able to incorporate it if you think that it makes sense into your own work. I understand that most writers actually are not like this at all, and we basically have to go through a long and extended process of trial and error. I know that I did, right? I mean, someone could have told me this when I was, 14, and I'm telling you, I would have been like, screw you, old man. Anyway, that was so what we do in stories, I want to, I've said this many times, and it's really a new reduction for me in a lot of ways. We are dramatists. We are dramatists. We might want to think what we want about, how highfalutin and wonderful writing is and how superior it is and how, the greats have bestowed us with these incredible works. But what they've done is they've basically taken drama, characters in action with each other, and written it down so that we can read the dramatic action. We don't need any sets. We don't need any actors. We don't need any, those tin things that you shake to make thunder. We don't need any of those things because we use words to do them all, to dramatize something. And what we dramatize is a struggle. That is a story. A story is a struggle of a character against the world, basically. That it's a character is something that developed over time. In the earliest stories, stories were often about single characters doing things. Obviously, characters were doing things, but also was chronicling a whole history. But over thousands of years, it's more or less reduced to this idea of a single individual, which seems to be all that, you know, readers can understand in a moment versus the world around them. So we dramatize struggle. And what we do is we have a protagonist trying plus trying to get. So this is, and not getting equals dramatized want. It basically shows us how much they want it. This is what our reader is interested in. This is what makes a story and story characters of interest to a reader. The reader wants things too. Do they try and struggle to get what they want? A little bit, maybe, maybe not. But a story is this incredible focus on a character who wants something and they're trying to get it. And we dramatize how much they want it. The more they want it, the better, basically, for our reader. The more potent the story is. And we dramatize how much they want it by having them not get it. Having them get it does not tell the reader at all about how much they want it. My wallet story, I lost my wallet, I called up the restaurant, they had it, I went down there and picked it up, is not a story because I got what I wanted. You don't know how much I wanted it. You didn't know that there was a picture of my daughter in it, the day that she lost her tooth, the day that it was this, that, and the other thing. You don't get any of that because I just got it back. So showing me struggling to get it is the way we do. Dramatize want, we show want. So when I say show, don't tell, this is what I mean. We show want. We want to answer for ourselves, who is it that wants? Who wants? This is our protagonist. This person is changed by the struggle to get. Okay, so I want to be just a little bit clear here. A story is not about getting or not getting what you want. A story is about the character's struggle to get what they want. Does that make sense? So whether they get it or not is not really material. It's about the struggle, and that is the core of the story. And that is the thing that the reader is taking away. They get to read about a story of a character struggling, and they get to learn about themselves and their capacity to struggle to get what they want also, not whether the character gets it or doesn't get it. That's just the reward or punishment at the end of the story. And ideally, we've gone someplace higher than that because we're seeing something about human beings and our indomitable spirit, as we sometimes say. So this person, the protagonist, is changed by the struggle to get. And then this is now that we have our protagonist, we want to ask these questions. What is motivating our protagonist? Why do they want it? So, right, go back to my wallet story. Why do I want my wallet? Do I care about my credit cards? Maybe. Do I care about blah, blah, blah? No, I'm saying that the reason I want it, I don't care about the money. I don't care about this. I don't care about the wallet. Is it a Gucci wallet? I mean, is that what I'm after? No, I'm after this picture of my daughter, that day, da, 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 da. That's why I want it. The degree that I'm motivated to get it displays the degree to which I also want it, right? So answer, why do they want? We want to understand why they want on a material level. right? And we want to understand on a spiritual level. So I want my wallet is the material thing, and we can even say the picture inside the wallet is the material thing. But what I really want is the memory of that time with my daughter at the beach, and we saw that tourist get hit with the coconut or whatever it is. So I want the memory. The memory is important to me because maybe the daughter has been lost, right? The daughter is gone and all I have is this. That's the spiritual element. So yes, I want the actual picture. There's a material element, but I also want the spiritual element. That's the thing that's really important. The picture is meaningless in comparison to what that picture gives me in terms of the memory. These two things, the material level and the spiritual level, and we talked about this a little bit in movies, Bonnie and Clyde. Bonnie wants money. That's the material level, right? But at the middle of the movie, she gets the money. She has money, and she still goes to rob another bank. So there's a material level, and we even often give our characters the material level in order to reveal the fact that that is not enough, that it is in fact the spiritual level that they really want. Bonnie wants respect, and that's worth risking her life for. So what do they want on a material level and a spiritual level? This is motivation. The motivation, John Barth said, we always begin with, it's the ground situation. But basically the ground, like there's a bad situation. The beginning of our story always suggests trouble, basically. The way I think of it is the motivation is based on disequilibrium, right? So Bonnie she is not respected. She has a disequilibrium in terms of respect, and that's why she wants to attain respect. We could look at it as Bonnie doesn't have money, and that's why she wants money, right? But she has a disequilibrium in terms of money. She doesn't have it. And she also has a disequilibrium in terms of respect that she doesn't have. And she wants them both. So she basically wants to move from a state of disequilibrium to equilibrium. This is, Ram, I think of you particularly, but like when you are casting that girl in the beginning of your story, this is something you can bring to understanding her character. What is her disequilibrium? What is she lacking that she's then trying to get, right? You might understand that you're completely reconceptualizing the character at this point. You're not just writing some stereotype. You're writing a passionate human being who is in a state of loss, right? A state of disequilibrium. And now they're actually going to be doing everything all the way through that story to get them what they want. Right? It's a completely mind-blowing level of understanding our character. The degree of disequilibrium, right, shows the degree of motivation. I don't know what you feel about the famous Indian movie in the US was Slumdog Millionaire, right? Apply this a little bit, if you will, to the beginning of Slumdog Millionaire. What doesn't he have, right? The degree of disequilibrium. And it's not just about the $1 million, right? It's not just about that. It's like Bonnie and Clyde, right? It's about respect. The human will to get the money, which is supposed to achieve I forget how that movie turns out, but anyway, the seeking the money, but seeking the respect that the money is supposed to bring, right? It's the same story. So the degree of disequilibrium at the beginning, Bonnie you know, treated like trash or whatever, however you want to describe it. Whoever our character is, Ram, you can think about your character. We can all think about all of our characters at the beginning of our story. What is their disequilibrium? And that will display for us and give us some insight to the degree of their motivation, which we finally show through their struggle. Okay, I've already said this, but the person who wants is the protagonist. And then everything that stops the protagonist, that does not give them what they want, is the antagonist. Sri Charan, I'm thinking about your story a little bit. So like, is the ocean an antagonist? It should be. The ocean must be an antagonist to the protagonist. We don't have, the rest of the world is not helping us get what we want and just going along for the ride. That's why it's a story. It's a story about this struggle and conflict. And from this, the protagonist is a vehicle for the reader's experience of the struggle. The reader moves towards discovery of what happens. And it's not what happens whether the character gets what they want or doesn't get what they want. It's what happens out of the duration of struggle. Is it transcendence through struggle or defeat through struggle? That might be symbolized by they get what they want, you know, or not. But that's not the issue. The issue is not whether they get their wallet or don't get their wallet. The issue is where they arrive, what happens as a result of this protracted struggle to get what they want. Okay, so protagonist is vehicle for reader moving towards discovery of what happens, which is a result of struggle, which is our subject, and not either getting or not getting. That's it. That's my little speech. Speech.
Thank you, Otis, and thank you all for joining in. And do send in your pieces. We'll probably come up with a slightly revised system of sending in and sharing these pieces with the others also in maybe this week or in the next couple of weeks for sure. And we'll see everyone next Sunday.
Yeah, Abhinav, let's just for next week just do it the regular way, and we'll get as we develop a plan, then we'll let them know if we shift.
Sure.
Okay, well, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.